I'm Bob Harris of Decorative Concrete Institute. Welcome to Duramin's training and educational series for industrial and decorative flooring systems. All right, we're getting ready to mix our Param 5500 over the top of our properly prepared wood substrate in which we screwed down the expanded metal lath. Before we mix, a couple of important factors. We're going to be mixing in 15-gallon plastic drums here, and despite them being plastic, they will still absorb some water. And we don't want them to absorb the water from our mix that has the proper proportions. So we pre-wet the drums, and then of course, once we've wet all the sides, we dump the buckets over, get all the remaining residual water out of them. Make sure you read the technical data sheets for this material, but the mix ratio is between 5 to 5 1/4 quarts per bag. And so what we're doing is we're mixing 2 bags. So 5 times 2 is 10, or 5 1/4 would be 10 1/2 quarts for 2 bags. So just be real cautious on how much you mix. So generally the first batch is going to be the benchmark for the rest of your pour. What I mean is the materials are somewhat temperature related with regard to how they mix. So if it's much cooler and you have cooler water and you're mixing in the cooler part of the year, you may not need as much water. Conversely, if it's warm, you're pouring in the summer, you're going to be at the top end of the 5 1/4 quarts per bag. So to expedite the process, normally what we'll do is we'll have a big drum, maybe perhaps even a 55-gallon drum. We'll put a board across the top of it like a 2x6. This bucket would sit up on top of the 2x6, and you can see it has a hole that's been previously cut out with the proper mix ratios per bag, or you could make it where it was 2-bag increments. So in this case, we would have dumped in, say 10 1/2 quarts for 2 bags, for example. Wherever the water leveled out, we would cut a hole in it, so you could submerge the bucket into the water, set it on top of the level 2x6, and it spews out the side, okay? And then tilt it backwards so you don't lose the water and dump it into the bucket. As opposed to sitting here measuring out 4 quarts, 4 quarts again, and then 2 quarts. It's just a much more expeditious process. So we have our mix ratios ready to go. We have 10 1/2 quarts, which is going to be 2 bags. You want to mix a full 3 minutes when mixing each batch. So what you need to do is, now we're only mixing 4 bags, but let's say, for example, we were mixing 100 bags. We would probably have a minimum of 3 or 4 mixing barrels, and we would start with our first batch, and roughly 1 minute into the mixing of the first batch, we would start a second drill. So we have drills running at all times. What we're striving for is a continual feed of material. We don't want to have a cold joint environment where you could potentially have the material setting up. You can use larger mixing vessels as well. There's plenty of them available where you can mix actually 5 bags. There are pumps available. So it just depends on what your intention is and the scope of work. This is just a small panel, so we're going to go ahead and just use 1 drill. We're going to mix our first batch, and while we're putting it down over there, we'll start to mix our second batch. When working with any cement-based products, safety is really not a game, so you need to, at a minimum, protect yourself. You need to protect yourself from the airborne dust or the silica that comes out. So dust masks, you can see we have non-absorbent gloves. Cement is caustic, and I've seen some pretty severe cement burns, so go ahead and use common sense and protect yourself. You do need to use a minimum 650 RPM drill, like you see right here. And in this case, we're using what I refer to as a jiffy-style mixer. That's almost like a football shape. And what that does is it conforms to the side of the bucket. In other words, we've got a kind of a beveled edge on the bucket, so this conforms to that, as opposed to using a different mortar-style paddle, which would kind of gouge the bucket. So this is the right paddle to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to get ready to start mixing the material. And once we start dumping the first bag in, the drill's moving at all times, meaning turn it on. Don't wait and dump a whole bag in. You want it to be mixing as it's getting dumped in, okay? Also, you don't want to sit here and go up and down. That's going to entrain or entrap air into the mix. And once we get our batch mixing, we'll go ahead and have the camera kind of come over and zoom in. What we're looking for is basically a quarter-size little bubble at the vortex of down where it's mixing. And that is an indicator that we're at the right water ratio, water cement ratio. If that bubble grows to, say, a 50-cent piece size, it's overwatered. And what happens if it's overwatered? You could have some strength concerns, but more importantly, when we're out using a smoothing paddle, you'll see smoothing lines if it's overwatered. If it's underwatered, you don't have the appropriate amount of water, it's simply not going to level like we need it to level. So we're going to get busy on mixing and get back with you in just a minute here. Yeah. I'll dump you, you can drill. Go ahead. Go ahead. All right. So it's a good idea to always have a spatula or a margin trowel, and what you always want to do is scrape the side of the bucket. Keep the bucket clean, because if you don't clean the residual powder, the unmixed powder, that's going to be the first thing that dumps out onto your floor. So just keep the sides clean, and we'll keep mixing here to see where we're at in terms of our vortex that I was talking about. Now keep in mind, we're pouring this in the cooler part of the season. It's mid-December, and so we purposely backed off a little bit on our mixed water. You can't take water out, but you can always add a little bit, so please keep that in mind. Gotcha. Here we are on our first batch of Param 5500. We did add an additional 8 ounces of water to the 2 bags. You notice I'm not lifting with my back, I'm just simply letting it pour over. Normally on an actual job we'll have a couple guys pouring, and I'm just sliding here. I haven't used my back yet at all, and the only time I'll lift it is when the bucket's almost empty. Like right about in here. So it's lightweight, so you have to work smart. So our second batch is just about done. I'll just use a little hand trowel to get into these corners here. There's. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the gauge rake. During our installation, we had 2 areas where the lath bled up into the surface like I talked about earlier. So we just took the lath screws and just secured it down. That's what I'm talking about. You have to pay close attention to how you secure the lath. So we've gauge raked it out, and now we're going to do a quick smooth. Now, the key to the smoother is the technique that you use. So if I'm walking in this direction, I'm actually going to angle the smoother slightly this way, okay? Not that way, because that's going to pull a wave of material the opposite direction. So in my mind, I'm thinking, have a wave coming with me. So for example, you can see the angle I'm going at. I get into this corner, I turn, and now I go opposite direction. I turn, so just for demonstration purposes, can you grab a lath screw, and let's look right here. You can see 2 areas in which the lath has floated up. So this is a great example of how we'll fix it. Just screw that down. There's 2 areas. Everywhere else looks pretty decent here. So just watch right here. It's all right. Beautiful. Sucked it right on time. Perfect. Problem fixed. Problem solved. Okay, so to finish it off here, I'm just going to make one pass over that area. Come in this corner here. Step off. Now watch what I do here at the end. I don't want to pull a whole big wave off. And then one last pass that way. Same thing here in this corner. And that's it. You can see how nicely this lays down. It's laying down ultra flat. No smoother lines, which means that the mix ratio was appropriate, meaning we have a nice level surface, in addition to no smoother lines. Now keep in mind, this is a good product, even if it's not over wood, which is more important. It's just so important that you get the mix proportions correct, like we did. In this case, we're going to put Scrofino over this surface as an alternative tomorrow to show you how that goes down. Okay, to recap what we've done to this point on the Param 5500 is we prepped all the wood we showed earlier in the videos, and then we applied the Param 5500 yesterday. Keep in mind, you can leave this as a final wear surface. However, you could get some telegraphing cracks if there's deflection in the wood like we talked about. Also, this is monochromatic, meaning it's a solid color, and oftentimes clients want the natural variegation of concrete. And in order to do that, we are going to apply Scrofino, probably Scrofino regular and then a Scrofino superfine to get that look and feel of a traditional concrete. So in order to prep for the Scrofino, what we're going to do is we're taking a 36 grit sandpaper and we're going to sand the Param 5500. We're going to then vacuum that, and after it's vacuumed, we'll take a damp mop it. Once that's dry, we'll apply CP 1000 like we talked about on other videos, and then we'll come back at the appropriate time and we'll apply the first coat of Scrofino. We just finished sanding the Param 5500, and it's really important to get the dust particulate off the surface prior to the next step. So what we're going to do is we're going to vacuum, and then once we get the dust off, Joe's going to run a damp mop off of it so we know it's ultra clean. Okay. So the surface has been prepped and cleaned on the Param 5500. Now it's time for the next step, which is the application of CP 1000. You want a decent amount on there. Read the technical documents for the coverage rates. On this first coat, you want to allow a minimum of 4 hours dry time, and then come back with a light mist coat on the second coat. And after the second coat is dry, tack-free, which is probably 30 to 45 minutes, you don't see any visible wet spots, you're ready to go with your first application of Scrofino.